The Coquitlam Community Association welcomes you to the debate. Briefly, I will explain why. The reason we are here is to get clarity and a better understanding of the impacts of the yes and no outcomes on BC residents. The BCA has taken no stand on the propositions that will be put forward and see ourselves as a totally neutral entity whose sole task is to assist our residents in making informed decisions. The heavy lifting will be done by the two sides, and we encourage you to ask the tough questions. The representatives are highly knowledgeable and can handle it. For the commercials. First off, I would like to thank School District 43 for allowing usage of their facilities, including sound equipment, and being so amenable to our requests. Bill Trask today and many principals prior have gone out of their way to accommodate us, and we thank them. We have been extremely fortunate to have David Driscoll graciously agree to moderate this event, and after 10 years mayor in Port Moody is perfectly suited to the task. David has his own inimitable style, and once he takes over, all details will be his.
Graham, our Coquitlam Community Association, I want to express my appreciation for getting this matter into the public forum. It is one of the most wonderful things we can do as communities, not as ratepayers or anything else, but to ask the question of how best can we represent ourselves through our democratic systems. And to paraphrase someone who all recognize, democracy is a horrible system. It's simply the very best there is. And my appreciation to the panelists who are committing their own time and efforts in pursuit of making a more perfect way of having our community properly represented and dealing with the issues that will confront us and will confront our children from time to time. So thanks to the association, thanks to the speakers, and a discreet thanks to my very good friends who keep volunteering me for things that I would otherwise avoid. Thank you. Maria, would you please begin?
Just doing a brief intro. My name is Maria, as mentioned. I work for the Broadband Institute. I'm the BC director, and I'm one of the spokespeople for the Vote PR BC campaign. And for us, this issue is one fundamentally about fairness. And when governments can get 100% of the legislative power with 40% or sometimes less of the vote, something is not right with our democracy. Election after election, a minority of voters gets to decide who our government is, and then that government has entire control for 4 years in terms of what legislation is passed. There's very little that the opposition can do to prevent legislation from being passed against the majority government. And that's minority rule, plain and simple, and we don't think that our democracy is as fair or as broad, frankly, as it should be. And there's not as many people included as are impacted by the decisions made by our governments. And as a result, people from across our province are increasingly disenchanted with democracy. They're distrustful politicians and political parties. And voter participation has been in a steady decline, and we see that in particular with young people who don't see the point in voting. This fall, we have an opportunity to change that. We have an important decision in front of us. The decision is clear and is simple. Do we want to keep our current first-past-the-post voting system, a system that we inherited as a colony of the UK, a system that probably made sense 150 years ago when there might have been two parties and a much smaller electorate? There was very few people that were allowed to vote at that time. But in an increasingly complex world with increasingly complex challenges, we're long overdue to review how well our voting system is serving us. The opportunity to choose a new way of voting is, we're recommending that you vote for proportional representation. We think that's a voting system that works for you, no matter where you live and no matter what your political views. It's an opportunity to make your vote count. Like British Columbians in almost 70% of our province, I live in a safe seat. So what that means is essentially the outcome of my riding is determined whether or not I cast my ballot. The other 30% of the province lives in ridings that are swing seats. I think many of you probably live in those ridings. And so in a safe seat, voters often feel frustrated because they don't see their vote matter. In a swing seat, the frustration comes from, in some situations, almost half of the riding voting for somebody other than who gets elected. And how well are those people represented for the next 4 years? And I think that's a question that we want voters to consider when they're making this decision this fall. We think proportional representation provides you with an opportunity to make your vote count, whether you live in a safe seat, whether you live in a swing seat, no matter where you live in the province. If 40% of the vote equals 40% of the seats, if the percentage of vote is what matters, then every single vote needs to count, and politicians will pay attention to that. We see criticism during election campaigns of party leaders not visiting certain ridings or paying a lot of attention to certain parts of the province, and they do that for good reason. There's strategy there because they don't need to pay attention to the rest of the province. They know what votes they need to win in what ridings, and all of the resources and attentions go there. And where do you think the policies are? The policies that they introduce, who do you think they are benefiting? I'll keep this mic down. I've got a diverse group of friends and neighbors who support various political parties, and they all feel, and many of them feel this way. And so it's not about who you vote for or your party not winning. It's fundamentally about fairness and about feeling that every person in our democracy is represented. We don't want you to have to hold your nose to vote for a candidate or a party you don't believe in, the dreaded strategic voting, because under proportional representation, you'll be able to vote your beliefs and your values and know that your vote will matter. We also know that politicians should be working together on the issues that are important to us. We have, as I mentioned, a lot of really complex issues that we're facing, but we also know how shockingly rare it is under our current system. If the government introduces something, if the opposition opposes it, if the opposition proposes a good idea, the government won't accept it, not because it's not a good idea, but because they don't want to take the political beating of not being the ones who are right. They put parties before people, and we see this on a really, really regular basis. How many times have we seen MLAs vote for measures they know their constituents oppose? How many times have your MLAs voted against their parties? Under ProRep, they'll have to think twice before pulling that kind of move. In more than 90 countries around the world, proportional representation has led to more satisfaction with democratic institutions, more diverse involvement in elected politics, higher voter turnout, and more youth engagement. Proportional representation gives everyone a voice and gives voters more choice. It is true that for most of us, proportional representation is unfamiliar. Although again, more than 90 countries use it, so I think that when we say to British Columbians that it's too complicated, what we're essentially saying is the rest of the world can figure it out, but you can't. We just don't think that's true. We think if people in Germany and in Sweden and New Zealand and throughout the world are able to use the system, we trust that British Columbians are able to as well. But it is unfamiliar, and taking on something new can feel risky. So know this, with proportional representation, we will all get to keep our local MLA. In the regulations, it says very clearly that no region of the province will lose MLAs. The size of the legislature will not increase much, if at all. Again, in the regulations, it says the maximum 10% increase. And we also know that there's important safeguards in place to ensure fringe parties don't get undue influence. The process has been set up importantly, I think, so that once voters get a chance to see how it works, after 2 elections, you'll be able to change your mind if you don't like it. So the uncertainty or the unfamiliarity that may be a concern, even though you know that your vote doesn't count, or even though you're frustrated with politics, and even though you see politicians say one thing and do another, or you see governments change but nothing else really changed, you might still be concerned about what this will mean for our province. We can try it, we can see, and we can change. I will say, though, that every jurisdiction that has changed to ProRep, none of them have gone back to first past the post. So we really have everything to gain and nothing to lose from ProRep. It's a new way of voting that works for you. This fall, vote for ProRep and get what you vote for.
I'm going to stand up because I might be able to see you. My name is Suzanne Anton, and I represent the No to Proportional Representation Society. We're a cross-partisan society, which is the official no group, or is representing the official yes group. And thank you to the taxpayers of British Columbia who are supporting each of these groups with your funding. We are a cross-partisan team. You may know that I'm a pretty hardcore BC Liberal. My partner in this venture is called Bill Thielman, who you may also know as a very hardcore BC NDP. And our third co-director is Bob Peckus, who is a civil servant, and a top civil servant, a deputy minister who served under both, well, Social Credit, NDP, and BC Liberal government. So he cuts right down the middle. So we are a cross-partisan team which is opposed to proportional representation. And here's why. How many of you have had the chance to go to Victoria and visit the legislature? Quite a few of you. So you may know, or you may have heard, but if you were there for a session, the speaker will often introduce the legislature by, say hello to and welcome the guests to the legislature by saying, "Welcome to the People's House." It is the people's house. It's your house. It's the community's house. It's everyone's house. It belongs to the people of British Columbia. And what that means is they are your representatives who are there in the people's house. That is a fundamental basis of our democracy in British Columbia. What proportional representation wants to do is change that. It wants to change it into the house belonging to the political parties. It wants you to vote for political parties as opposed to people. How many of you know who your MLA is? Pretty much everybody. How many of you know how your MLA got there? You went out and voted for them, right? You went out, and in fact, you might have gone to all candidates' meetings, you saw them at the front of the room, and you chose the one who had the right character, the right community leadership, a political party. You put all those things into your head, and you choose accordingly. That's how we choose our people right now. We are voting for community leadership and people who have demonstrated community leadership. We are not voting for political parties right now. When you vote for a political party, the fundamental relationship changes because the people in the legislature, many of them, are there because the political party has put them there. And they are then, who are they responsible to? Are they responsible to the community of Coquitlam or Burnaby? Are you mostly from Coquitlam, I guess? Or are they responsible to their political party? New Zealand has a law which is making its way through the legislature, which says if you are a political party person in the legislature, and you quit your political party, like Maxime Bernier, we all know who he is, and he quit his political party, he quit the Conservatives the other day. In New Zealand, he could get, the party leader can kick him out of the legislature because he ruins the proportionality of the legislature. He's not representing that party anymore, so he's not entitled to be there. Imagine that a political party leader has the opportunity to kick someone out of the legislature. But that is actually a demonstration of the fundamentally different relationship. Right now, the only people who can kick your MLA out of the legislature are you at the next election. Nobody can kick Maxime Bernier out of the parliament except his constituents at the next election. But in New Zealand, they are proposing this law that the party leader can kick you out if you are no longer representing that party. And that is a real illustration of the fundamental difference between the two systems. Now, the pro-PR people talk a lot about how nice it would be to have a system that works in this way, but it's a real argument about process. It's not an argument about product. And the problem with proportional representation is that it just doesn't turn out very well. And you can look around the world for examples. The latest example is Sweden. They had an election on Sunday. And the real extremist party got almost 20% of the vote. So they're in the legislature now in a big way. They have a lot of small parties. They don't know how they're going to form a government. And the headline in the Swedish newspaper the next day was chaos. K-A-O-S, which I guess is Swedish for chaos. So it doesn't turn out well. It's not turning out well in Sweden. Northern Ireland has an SPV system, which is a kind of proportional representation. They have been a year and a half without a government. Belgium went 589 days. That was the previous record holder without a government. And we all know about Italy. Proportional representation, they've had 64 governments in 72 years or some statistic of that nature. It doesn't work. It's not a good system. It creates a lot of fracturing of political parties, a lot of small political parties who are forced to negotiate some kind of government after the election. You don't get to choose the government anymore. You don't get to choose an NDP government or a BC Liberal government. The political parties, remember now it's their house, it's their territory, they're the ones that get to negotiate who the government is going to be, to negotiate what the policies will be. It's their house, their government, and I think that that's a poor system. We've got a terrific province in British Columbia. We have the best economy in the country, the lowest unemployment rate in the country. We have a very good system of democracy. Let's keep it that way. Please vote to keep the system we've got. First past the post, the very first box on the ballot. Vote for that, and you don't have to touch anything else. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll start here and then go there.
Can someone explain proportional government to me?
Uh,
I heard no, yes, but I don't know what they're talking about here. I know nothing about proportional government.
Okay, perhaps we,
What I'm still learning.
okay. With, can you hold this a second? Because if that question is clarified, some of the answers won't be terribly understandable. So let's give each of the proponents an opportunity to describe what it was. Suzanne?
So I'm advocating that we keep the current system, which you probably do understand. It's a pretty straightforward system. You vote, you go into the voting booth on election day, and you choose the candidate that you like in your riding. Have any of you scrutineered? How many of you have been scrutineers before? A few of you. You know that when you watch the votes being counted, it's very straightforward. You watch the votes being counted, and you get a person elected at the end of the day. In proportional representation, I'll let Maria explain any one of the three systems. You cannot, they are unexplainable, so that question actually is not answerable today because the government has not fleshed out each of the three systems. They've got sort of a general description, and then they say, after the vote, if the vote goes through, they need to work out the details. There's a powerful lot of details that need to be worked out. And so when I think it's actually kind of offensive, this vote, and I don't know why the government didn't wait another year, figure out these three systems, allow you to know what the three systems are so that we can vote in an educated way. None of us can know now. I don't know. Nobody can pretend to know because so much of it needs to be worked out after the vote. I actually think it's an insult to the voters of British Columbia. The STV vote, when it was done the second time, it was a big education, lots of knowledge about it, lots of information, and people were able to vote with that information up in front of them. You are not able to do that, unfortunately, with this vote.
Maria?
Thanks. So yes, proportional representation at its core is that the percentage of votes that a party receives should equal the percentage of seats that they receive in the legislature. So right now, a party that receives 40% of the votes will likely receive a majority government. In under proportional representation, they would receive 40% of the seats. So they would be in a position where they would likely have to form a coalition government with another party. So that's at its core, that's what proportional representation means. Now, almost every single country or jurisdiction that has proportional representation has a slightly different variation on it. And what's on offer to British Columbians right now are three different systems. They were selected to take into account things that British Columbians identified as priorities to them through a process that the Attorney General set up earlier this year. So one of the things that people clearly said that they wanted was to retain local MLAs. So in all but one situation, all of the three systems on offer retain a local MLA. Actually, I think all of them do. And the difference then is, so everybody elects an MLA like you do now, but sometimes if the outcomes of, if there's a number of really, really close ridings, so 52% of people vote for one MLA or vote for the person who gets elected, the 48% of the people in that riding, their votes do not count for anything. Under proportional representation, all those initial seats would be counted, and then there would be top-up seats. So to ensure that there's proportionality in the legislature. What we have with the current vote is the concept of proportional representation, which is what the first question is asking us. Do we want a proportional system? Do we want a system in which the percentage of votes equal the percentage of seats? And then we also know what the outcomes are going to be. We know that there's no region of the province that will lose representation. We know the size of our legislature won't increase. What we have with the three systems on offer are three different routes to get there. And essentially what each of them does is provides a different mechanism for the top-up, for the mechanism to reach proportionality. Now, I know Suzanne finds it very, very complicated, but again, people in countries, in over 90 countries in the world, manage to use the system well. And the strongest economy in Europe uses a proportional system. We could cherry pick countries that are doing well, that are not doing well, that are first past the post, that are proportional. But what we need to look at is what's best for British Columbians and how well served are we by our current system. Yes, we have a strong... Okay, so top up, so if in an area, in a region, one party wins all of the seats, but they win it by 3% each time. So there was a huge number of voters that voted for a different party, and they're not represented by that first round of voting. So the top-up would then enable MLAs from those other parties to ensure that there was still representation. In all situations but one, it would be voters that would determine the regional top-ups as well. Now, the one situation where that's not the case, we also are not advocating for what's called closed lists. What Suzanne described is essentially when parties get to pick who is in the legislature. We don't think that that should happen. We think all MLAs should be put into the legislature by the voters. We are looking for commitments, and so far we've gotten them from the Green Party. We hope that the BC Liberals and the BC NDP will as well, that they are committed to open lists, which would take this issue off the table. And, you know, I also question the ability of voters to kick out MLAs right now. I mean, this is going off, but to her point, I mean, the voters in Point Grey tried to do that, but because there's so many safe seats in this province, if with the leader of the BC Liberal Party, when she failed to win her seat, she ran in a by-election in a safe seat where she could win. So there's problems in our current system. A lot of the problems that are identified, I think, exist in our current system. We have an opportunity to develop a new system that is made for BC, that takes into account our geographic and demographic particularities and ensures a fair outcome in which the percentage of the votes equal the percentage of the seats. Right now, we have situations in this province. In 1996, the BC Liberals won the popular vote. So the more people in this province voted BC Liberal than BC NDP. The BC NDP ended up with a majority government. In 2001, it's the only true majority government that we've had in the last 18 elections. The BC Liberals won 57% of the vote. They won 97% of the seats in the legislature. So what we have with our current system are significantly distorted outcomes, and what we would have under proportional representation is a legislature that's composed of the percentage of MLAs from a party that equals the percentage of people that voted for them.
We're going to have a few clarifications are going to come out during the course of the evening, more so, and the advantage in terms of not having to explain it resides with Suzanne, because that's all of our experience. So there's more awkwardness in terms of explaining three systems, so we understand it. And Suzanne, is there any specific short rejoinder you have on that?
Thank you. I think the fundamental outcome is that every party, the people who love proportional representation are small parties because they can't put their candidate in front of you and get their candidate elected. People just don't like their candidates enough. So they want to get in through the back door. So you could use an example of the BC Conservatives, for instance, the Communist Party. The Communists love this because they might get a few votes. Marijuana Party, for example, is not a bad example in British Columbia. The Marijuana Party, they need, if you can get 5% of the votes, you can get your people into the legislature. How they would get there, where they would be placed around British Columbia, those are the details that are not worked out. So in order to achieve the proportionality, that's the part. Thanks for the condescension, Maria, but it's nothing to do with being condescending, that I can't understand it. The fact of the matter is that these details are not worked out. And when you go to the Elections BC website, Elections BC has done its best to explain it. But when you go there, there's quite a long list under each of the three systems. This needs to be worked out later. This needs to be worked out later. How would you get these small parties into the legislature when nobody actually voted for them? That's the issue, and that's the challenge with proportional representation. But I think at the end of the day, that's all process stuff. You need to think about how it turns out for your jurisdiction. And around the world, in Northern European countries now, which are the biggest comparable, it's not working out very well at the moment. So, which is why I don't think we should be going there.
Thank you. We're going to work through the questions now. I've been asked to repeat them because it's going to be online. It's not because you haven't clearly expressed them, it's because it's simply a matter of being heard.
But that kind of crowd had been passed through without any resistance or, without
Okay.
some.
Okay, let me have a time. So the issue is, if proportional representation were in place, could some sensibly unpopular service cuts have been made? Is that a fair paraphrasing?
Sure, I'll tackle that one. As I was introduced earlier, my name is Anthony Hodgson. In my day job, I'm a professor of biomedical engineering at UBC. I have a startup company. I have an activist daughter who's 21 years old who almost got arrested up on the mountain. And so actually seeing the video of her facing down police officers there makes me realize that people her age are very politically involved, and she's not working with any of the parties. So, and there's a reason for that. And so we can talk about that at some point as well. The question you raised has to do with the arbitrariness of power that can be held under a first-past-the-post system. And I think I can use 4 words: Donald Trump, Doug Ford. Okay. This week in particular, Doug Ford running roughshod over our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and then effectively, after being told by the courts that he wasn't allowed to do that, he basically said, screw off, I'm going to do it anyway, I'm going to invoke this other rule that lets me do that. He was elected he personally was elected by a small fraction of a percent of the people of Ontario because he was running as a local MLA and an MPP in his local riding. He is the leader of a party that collectively, on the strength of, their candidates got 40% of the vote. Their MLAs were actually elected on the strength of about 20% of the people who cast votes, because many of the people who cast votes for the Conservative Party in ridings that ended up being held by the Liberal Party or the NDP or the Greens, their votes didn't actually elect any of the MPPs that are supporting Doug Ford. So really the decisions of a small fraction, about 20% of the voters in Ontario, have put Doug Ford in power. He's now able to execute, to exercise executive power in Ontario without taking into account the other 80% of people who didn't actually vote for him or any of his MPPs. This happens routinely. It is, I think the number right now is about 8 or 9 of the legislatures across the country have been elected with the support of roughly 40% of the voters. What will happen, you see that in elections under first-past-the-post, they're kind of on a hair trigger. We tend to get 2 dominant parties in most provinces, and as soon as the other party starts getting up to 38, 39% of the vote, they can flip it over to the other side. And when those parties are in power, they can exercise executive power. I think it was under, in one of the years in which Christy Clark was in power, the legislature sat for a handful of days because I don't remember the number, but she felt that the only important thing is holding executive power. She didn't feel that she had to go into the legislature and have her policies listened to, debated, modified by any of the other MLAs that were sitting there, who had been elected by us. And those are only the people. She wasn't even willing to put her policies in front of the people who were actually there in the legislature. There was no mechanism for the other half. Fully half of the voters in BC are not represented by somebody that they voted for. And so those people are completely ignored in what goes on in the
Give you a chance to speak, please. The issue was the examples given were examples of what the speaker deemed to be tremendously unpopular and damaging cutbacks. And I think the answer to the question that was asked was, is that possible under PR? And I'm going to give Suzanne a chance to speak to that as well.
Thank you for your question. And the answer is yes, it is possible that that would happen under PR, because every government, no matter how the government is formed, does need to be able to make decisions. The problem with PR is that you get decision making which is decentralized, so you don't really know who's responsible for it. So if that had happened under a PR government, you wouldn't know who you were going to cast a vote against the next time round, because it was this member of the coalition or that member of the coalition who wanted it. Right now, you know that that decision which made you annoyed, I think it's safe to say, you know what you could do, which is because you could hold this government accountable. People got tired of our government, and they voted us out. It was actually pretty even, as a matter of fact, but in terms of the way it played out, it has turned out that it is now an NDP government. So that is the accountability which is fundamental to our system right now, which is that if you don't like what government has done, if you don't like what they're doing, you can get rid of them. You know who's responsible, and you can vote against them in the next election. Now, Doug Ford, he's kind of the person that everybody loves to hate in this debate right now, and he's democratically elected by the voters of Ontario. He's making some controversial decisions, perhaps controversial. Number one, they actually seem to be fairly popular with the voters of Ontario. But secondly, more importantly than that, if the voters of Ontario don't like what he's done in 4 years' time, they'll kick him out. They'll kick him and his government out. And that is the accountability we have in our system right now. If you have a coalition government which is making unpopular decisions, who do you kick out? That's the hard part about proportional representation, is you don't have that direct line of accountability, which we have right now. I just will add one more thing, because there seems to be, even with what Anthony was saying just now, this thought that, that the BC Liberals, I get this a lot on my social media, oh, you'll never get back into power because we'll have proportional representation. It doesn't play out like that. You cannot guarantee what kind of government you will have in the future by having proportional representation. It plays out in unexpected ways. And certainly in Europe right now, it's playing out in very unexpected ways. They're getting a lot of really extremist parties coming into the legislature. We don't have an extremist party in the BC legislature, because extremist candidates cannot stand in front of a room full or a district and get elected. So we don't have extremist parties, but they do in Europe now. And that is a very unfortunate trend which is happening in PR jurisdictions around the world.
Okay. It is the disingenuous nature of the debate that's going on. And my comments are not necessarily comparing PR with first past the post, despite the fact that I'll openly admit that I am strongly in support of PR. But Suzanne, you mentioned in your earlier statement that it's a bipartisan group on no side. But we all know in this room that when this campaign truly gets underway, we're going to note that the NDP and the Greens are fundamentally in support of PR, and the Liberal Party, Diane Watts, your leader, everybody on the Liberal Party is going to fight no, and said that it's a death wish, basically, to get beaten this time. But the bottom line here is, if you are as passionate and as genuine as you would like the rest of the people in this room to believe about it, I would like to know how often you have stood up at Liberal conventions and argued on behalf of first past the post within the Liberal Party and urged them to change the way that they elect their leader and their respective candidates in each riding. Because we all know that you elect them on a basis of preferential voting. That's a system that's used in Australia. My accent is Australian, I know the system. It's a balloted off system, and it's used elsewhere. Even the NDP uses it. But it's a system that you use in your party. So if you fundamentally believe passionately that first past the post is a system Have you ever argued for that to be used within the Liberal Party? And if you have, why does the Liberal Party continue to use preferential voting?
Thank you for that question. Parties choose their candidates in different ways. Sometimes they can be appointed. Sometimes they're voted through a riding association. We'll have a riding meeting and choose the candidate. Sometimes they fill in gaps by kind of picking people up from the scruff of the neck and say, would you please run for us? Sometimes they're long-established candidates. Sometimes they're new candidates. That's up to the party, and that's who they put before the voters in the election. But I bet there's been all candidates meetings in this room, have there? Oh, many, there you are. The candidates sit up here, a Liberal candidate, an NDP candidate, a Green candidate, or whoever else is running in this riding, and they need to persuade you, the residents of Coquitlam, I'm assuming most of you are from Coquitlam, they need to persuade you as to which one should be elected. And if the party has made the wrong choice, you're not going to vote for that person. Because at the end of the day, in our current system, it is the voters who choose. It's the voters who determine who goes to Victoria. It's you who chooses. And the fundamental difference in PR is that to achieve proportionality, you have to put a lot of people into the legislature who no riding wanted. Nobody wanted them. But somehow they have to go in and fill up those gaps to achieve that wonderful, magical dream state of proportionality. So, yes, parties choose people in different ways. But all of those people have to stand up in front of a room full of voters and persuade a riding, a district, an area to vote for them.
Yeah, thanks. So I do just want to respond to this idea that with our current voting system, we vote for a person and not for the party. We know that when an MLA or an MP speaks out against their party, takes a position that is contrary to the party's primary position, they will often be kicked out of the party. Certainly they'll often be disciplined if they're not kicked out. If they try running again, not using the party label, not using the party's backing, they are very unlikely to ever be elected again. I think we could maybe, I can't even remember, I'm sure there's at least maybe one person for whom that happened. Suzanne dismisses the strong desire on the part of all of us to be represented in our legislature. She called it the people's house. It's not really the people's house. It's the elite's house. The people who are getting in there are the people up until recently, before we banned big money, they were the people who got paid to get there. They received a lot of money from a lot of backers to be in the people's house. What we want, we actually want people to get in there with the support of a riding's worth of voters. It's going to increase the number of people, number of votes that every MLA has to get by a factor of 2 or 3 to get into the legislature under pro-rep. Because when every vote counts, then you have to essentially convince a riding's worth of people to back you. Now that riding's worth of people is not in the current single-member ridings. If you're in an area where you've got sort of 50% party support, you're going to get your support over roughly 2 existing ridings. If you're representing a party that has about 33% support under pro-rep, you'll get that support drawn across about 3 ridings. So the question is, how far do you extend? How many people are we willing to exclude as voters? How many voters are we willing to say you don't deserve representation? We see, Suzanne also said that this is a small party issue. It's actually not at all. The biggest single group of voters who do not have representation in the legislature are Liberal Party supporters. All those Liberal Party supporters who voted for Liberal MLAs on Vancouver Island, here in Burnaby, New West, Coquitlam, big chunks of Vancouver, 8 of the 11 ridings in Vancouver, they didn't send anybody to Victoria. They're not represented by somebody they voted for. Over 300,000 of them are in that situation. That's more than the number of NDP voters who were denied representation. That's more than the number of Green Party voters who were denied representation. So with pro-rep, what will change is that in every region, and I know in this particular area, I think there was forget how many seats, it's 8 or 9 seats in Burnaby, Coquitlam, New Westminster. One Liberal MLA got elected, the other 8 all in NDP, okay? But I know for a fact that the Liberal Party has more than 10% support in this area. It's not fair that they didn't get more than one MLA there, okay? So.
Okay.
As far as this is your house, when we look over at the Doug Ford situation in Ontario, I don't think it's quite right to say that it's everyone's house in there anymore. I mean, yes, that is the result of how the voting system changed things, but there's still the vast majority of Ontarians who aren't represented and they don't have anything they can do about it until they're kicked out in 4 years. This sort of touches on what the lady up here front here was saying, where we have this big switch from left to right, or whichever direction you want to call it. The public servants beneath are sort of forced to deal with that change in policy. The proportional system, that would be less likely to happen. There would be changes, there would be unpopular changes made, I agree, but that's the result of government. Not everyone's going to be happy. Certainly in my own riding, I mean, I'm very happy with Joan Isaacs. I don't feel that my values all necessarily align with her, but I do really respect her, and I think she brings a solid voice. However, I'm from Chilliwack, and it's very well understood that any level of government there, except for perhaps municipal government, you could put a rooster in the position for the Conservative Party and they would still be elected. And frankly, I do know the guy out there, and I know he doesn't represent a lot of people, but that doesn't represent everyone, certainly. I don't want to slam on the Liberal Party at all. Yes, my question is sort of leading into this party system thing. I could be happy with not having proportional representation if we could abolish the party system, because I don't think it's fair to say that the party system is not taking dominance over here in our, pretty much the whole country here. Would you say that it's possible to keep a binary system and have all independents, or do we have to keep the party system, and in which case it's a binary system? How does it make sense not to change it to represent something that's non-binary, like our diverse range of political views?
Thank you.
So that's an interesting question, and one that people pose from time to time. The real purpose of a political party is that it's a group of people running in the election who say that we are capable of forming a government. It's your representative here, who is Joan Isaacs. She represents you. No, sorry. She's a neighboring riding. Okay. All right, anyway, there's a number, I'm sure you're from a number of different ridings. But in any event, your MLA represents you. And how many of you know where your MLA office is? Yeah, many of you. So if you don't like something that's going on in Victoria, you can march into your MLA. I was an MLA. I don't know when people came into my office, whether they were NDP or Liberal or whatever. They came in because they had issues that they wanted me to take back to Victoria, which I did. The point of having political parties is because you do need to have a government, you need to have a cabinet, you need to have ministers, and you need to have a premier. So the political party is the group of people who says, we can form government. The system that we're in, you do need to have the party, because you would have to have some way of coming to some kind of agreement of that. So right now what we have big tent parties right now. We have the NDP, which is in power right now, and that's interesting that Anthony says that John Horgan and all his team are elites. I'm sure some of them might argue with that. So they have formed government. Premier Horgan is the premier, and he's making decisions, some of which I like and some of which I don't like. He will present himself to the people in 2.5 years' time, and he'll get voted in again, or he won't. He probably will, as a matter of fact. He seems to be relatively popular at the moment. So that's the purpose of a political party. When you fracture into a whole bunch of small political parties, which inevitably happens under proportional representation, then you get coalitions. So right now, when you get the NDP being the government, you kind of know what you're going to get. If you get the Liberals for government, you kind of know what you're going to get. In fact, you do know what you're going to get because they have presented it to you running up to the election. They have said, this is our platform. When you have proportional representation, smaller coalition governments, you actually have no idea what you're going to get. It's no longer the voters' choice. It's the choice of the political parties who becomes the premier, who becomes the ministers, what the policies will be. So that is, historically, that is the reason for the parties. So it's an interesting question. It's sort of an interesting philosophical question, but it just doesn't work out that way in our Westminster style of democracy, which is what we have right now.
Okay, do you want to start, Joy, or?
I just want to comment on, or respond to Suzanne's comment that parties are for forming government, and I think it's an interesting way to describe it. Because I think that there's a lot of people who run for office, and there's a lot of us who vote for politicians because we want to see certain policy outcomes. We want our lives to be materially better. We want to have amenities available to us. We want our government to act on the things that we as a society need. And so if you're going in solely, I think that there's a, it can't be just about power, it has to be about outcomes. And when you have a first past the post system, when you're able to have a majority government that has complete legislative power with less than half of the vote, you're not in a position to have to look for what are the best policy outcomes for the majority of people. And I think this goes back to some of your questions. You know, if you have coalition governments that by necessity have to negotiate with each other about what the outcomes are, will it take a little bit longer? In some situations, maybe it will. But if the outcomes will be something that they are able to agree upon, and the parties do not form governments. The only way that the parties would have any mechanisms around negotiating coalition governments is based on the power that the voters give them, because the parties have nothing to negotiate if they don't have votes behind them. And so really it does come back to the people, and it comes back to the ways in which we are not, you know, we may have, Suzanne again cited the strongest economy in the country, low unemployment rates. You know what else we have? We have 1 in 5 kids living in poverty. We have a crisis of unaffordability across our province. We have people who, yes, maybe they are employed, but they have to have 2 jobs to even be able to make it work. Our governments are not meeting the needs of the population at large. And so when Tony references the elites in Victoria, you know, government is not accessible to a lot of people. Those of us who are here, just by virtue of being here and engaging in this conversation, have more access to our democracy. And I think those who are saying our current system is working, I think we need to look at who they are, and they're right, it is working for them, but it's certainly not working for all British Columbians. And I don't think that's a matter of where you fall in an ideological spectrum. I think if you're a conservative voter in the interior, polling at 14, 15, 16%, is that a fringe party? Are they being represented in the government right now, or in the previous government either? I have big questions around that. And I think with proportional representation, with parties taking clearer stands, the Big Tents do not allow us to have real clarity around what their positions are. Yes, we vote for platforms, but we also see governments come in with a majority that don't necessarily enact those platforms. And with checks and balances of coalition governments, with parties forced to answer to each other, there's more accountability, there's more transparency, and there's better outcomes at the end of the day for the majority of the population.
Hello. I just have to clarify a couple of positions on this. First of all, when you're talking about voting for your riding, and someone in your riding, and they win, say, by 65% or something, then they are your representative. Is that correct?
It depends on which of the 3 systems, but yes, they would be your
proportional representation.
Basically, under all of the systems, you would either have 1 MLA and a regional, a few regional MLAs. That would be for the mixed member. With a dual member, you would have 2 MLAs, so it'd be basically the first and second place.
My question is, you could hold them accountable
Yes.
for what goes on in your riding.
Yes, we have, all 3 systems are mixed systems, and so what that means is that essentially you have that local MLA, and then you have the proportional top-ups. So there are accountability mechanisms.
That was
built
the
in.
second half of that question. Then the top-ups are people who are percentage-wise voted in throughout the province, and they would just have a voice in government cuts, right?
No, both of them would be your MLA. So you would have a local MLA specific to your riding. I mean, again, it depends on 3 systems, and then you have a regional MLA.
But if, say, someone from the Green Party was voted in because they got 20% in 4 ridings, and then they're voted in, who are they accountable to?
The voters in the region. So all 3 of the systems on offer have regional proportionality rather than province-wide.
Oh, I see.
So what we would see is our local MLAs, and again, the riding boundaries will change.
And then the Green person, you could also hold accountable as they would in the riding next to you, where they also had.
It would be based on regions.
Okay, and the other question I had was, am I remembering something funny, but wasn't there a research council on this, a citizens research council that took a long time studying both
Yes.
systems and came to a conclusion?
The Citizens Assembly in 2005 spent a long time determining what system they would like to recommend for British Columbia. They recommended a single transferable vote, STV. There was referenda in 2005 and then again in 2009. And the issue hasn't gone away. Frankly, I think because people are still frustrated with politicians and it's proportional. One of the things I think that is addressed in this round, a lot of the one reason, and Tony can speak to this probably better than I can. He was involved in that process. But one of the things that people really didn't like about STV was how large the ridings were. And so when this government was doing consultation with the public around what element, what values they wanted to ensure were preserved in this process, local representation repeatedly came up. So all 3 systems on offer, one of them, rural-urban, does have a part of it is STV based. It's essentially a ranked voting system. But the concern in rural British Columbia in particular were that the ridings were geographically way too large. And so the current systems on offer address that concern. And the only areas where those kinds of large ridings are proposed are in urban areas under one of those 3 options.
I'm sorry, if we vote for proportional representation, we still don't know the system we're going to get?
There's 2 questions. One is, do you want first past the post or proportional? The second allows you to rank the 3 systems on offer. You can choose to answer that question or not. Again, the concept of proportionality is the key question, and then we know a number of these outcomes. And so some people will want to learn which route to get there, and others will not take the time.
If I may. The ballot has 2 parts. Are you in favor of first past post or proportional representation, whatever, check on it. If proportional representation, there are 3 other choices. I inquired of Elections BC, and they thanked me for my inquiry. Thank you for your inquiry about the counting of the votes. According to the Electoral Reform Referendum 2018 Act, the results of question 2, the question on proportional representation, are only material if a majority of the voters vote in favor of a proportional representation system. So what that means is if 75% said, let's stay with first past the post, then the second part is irrelevant. Okay? Assuming that the majority of voters support a proportional representation voting system, system on question 1, then the results of question 2 are binding on the government if more than 50% of validly cast ballots are in favor of the same voting system. There is a possibility, and I put this to them, though extremely remote, that 2 proportional voting systems could equally split the vote in question 2 in the second round of counting. If that occurs, the result of question 2 will not be binding on the government in terms of providing direction as to which proportional representation voting system the government takes steps to implement. So you've got 3 options on the second half of the ballot, provided the majority on the first question say we want to move to a PI. You've got 3 choices. And if more than 50% or 50% no, pick one of them, and that's binding. Okay? I'm sorry?
Is there a website? Elections?
Yes. Yes. Elections BC website.
Okay, so
Thank you for your question, and I think you've pointed out the fundamental flaw with this process, which is so Anthony, you were involved in the SDV process?
Not in the Citizens Assembly.
Okay. Were anyone here in the Citizens Assembly? No takers on that one. The Citizens Assembly, so Gordon Campbell in 2005, or actually I can't remember the year that it was appointed, but there was the same similar demand for a change in the election system. So they appointed a Citizens Assembly with people from all over British Columbia. They determined that in their opinion, having heard hundreds of presentations and expert opinion, that STV was the preferred process. It went to a vote in 2005. The vote didn't pass the then requirements of the Referendum Act. So they then had a second vote in 2009. And in 2009, there were maps, there was information, there was discussion about how it would work, there was the full meal deal for voters. And when the voters had all that information, they voted against it, quite resoundingly. The thing about the vote this time is you're being asked to vote on something which is inexplicable. We cannot explain it. Even though Maria and Anthony can say it's going to look something like this, you actually don't know how, in the dual member proportional, you actually don't know how the second person will be chosen. Details to be worked out later. This is the part I was mentioning earlier. Mixed member proportional. Details to be worked out later. So when you go to Elections BC website, it's a good website, and I think they make a valiant attempt to describe it, but you'll see there's a whole list of stuff that's not worked out yet. So that's why we don't know how any of the three systems will work. And I actually think it's insulting to voters. I think that Premier Horgan really should take another year and do it properly. There's no urgency on this. If it's a really great system, then people in British Columbia will be persuaded and they'll vote for it. But you should be able to vote for something knowing what it is. Because right now you can't know, none of us can know, I don't know, because it's just not worked out yet, and that's the problem. Well, I think what you don't get is the accountability. You ask You asked who people are accountable to. I don't think it is fair. My argument to you tonight is that it's not, because right now, the accountability, the fairness that arises is that you, in your neighborhood, you vote for the person that you choose. In proportional representation, no matter what the system is, all the ones, those top-up MLAs, they are essentially party people, and they are responsible to their political party, because it's the party that is putting them there. I will tell you something. One of the things that's a little bit of a mystery to me is why Premier Horgan supports this. Now, I know why he's doing it, because the Greens have asked him to do it. But I'm not really sure why he supports it, because he's I would say, and you know I'm a Liberal, I would say that Premier Horgan is in a pretty good position right now. If he had, when the next election comes around, he could very well win a majority government. So I don't really understand why he would want to change the system so that he was forced to be in another coalition like he's in right now. It's a little bit, I'm just throwing that out there because it is a little bit of a mystery to me why he supports it. Because it doesn't seem to me to be in the best interest of the NDP party at this point.
What I'm hearing again, even with this compliment of our current premier, is why would he want this when he could continue to have all the power? The fact that it's unfathomable to recognize that some people are in politics not for ultimate power, but for outcomes, and that recognizing that working with other people, that no one party has a monopoly on good ideas. No one party is going to be exclusively the ones that can deliver everything, and that maybe if we have a system where people collaborate, where ideas are coming from different parties, we might have better outcomes. So I think for me, this notion that we run for office, we support parties so that they can be in power, rather than we support parties or we support politicians to do things that make our lives better, is a fundamental disconnect, and I think that's why people are turned off of politics in general.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Quick question to the no proponents. Please tell me which jurisdictions that currently or previously used proportional representation have voted to return to first past the post. Thank you very much.
can tell you that a lot of the current proportional representation jurisdictions are trying to change their systems because they're so frustrated with their inability to form government. Italy is one of them. So this dream of collaboration, it does work sometimes, but it doesn't always work. So, for example, and I think we can't look at British Columbia for how proportional representation has turned out because we just haven't had it here. But when you look around the world, it's not turning out very well. Northern Ireland, they can't collaborate. They are unable to reach a decision as to who the government should be. Germany took 100 days to get a government. Sweden right now, well, we have to wait and see what Sweden, maybe they'll get a government soon, maybe they won't. We don't know yet how that one will play out because they just had the election a few days ago. But certainly the headline in the Swedish newspaper said chaos. It's a nice idea that the parties will all collaborate, but it just doesn't turn out that way. And the proportional representation countries, many of them are attempting to get back to more of a system like we have. And in fact, I have a Swedish person in my acquaintance right now who I see quite often. He is so strongly in favor of the system we have here. He grew up in Sweden. He emigrated here 15 years ago. He is so happy that we have first past the post here and that we do not have the proportional representation. He says it's a nightmare in Sweden and he does not want to get back to that kind of system.
Yeah, so just on I think I'm aware of 3 referendums that have been held in countries that have pro-rep. It's been done twice in Ireland, once in New Zealand, and also the Irish, their equivalent of MPs, had a review of their system a few years ago, or 3 or 4 years ago. In all cases, they reaffirmed their commitment to proportional representation. Whatever adjustments wanted to be made, they were going to be done on the basis of the fundamental principle of voter equality. So that's something important to understand. I also think Suzanne I appreciate this last question, can we actually name anybody who's gone back? The answer is no, we can't. I think Suzanne has sort of said it's not working in Europe, but has failed to produce any data. So here's one very clear fact. 25 years ago, Canada was ranked higher on the UN Human Development Index than the 7 OECD countries who have overtaken us in the past 25 years. Every single one of those 7 OECD countries that has overtaken us uses proportional voting. Why have they been able to accelerate their economic performance, their environmental performance, their social performance beyond what Canada has been able to do? It's fundamentally because they have more voices at the table. I also wanted to respond briefly to Suzanne's comment about not all the details being locked in. I said at the beginning, I'm a designer of medical technology. I'm thoroughly familiar with design processes. The first part of that is engaging stakeholders. You get as many people in the room as you can possibly get. You get all the perspectives, all the needs, all the concerns. If I fail to address the needs or concerns of any of the stakeholders, I'm going to have a flawed design. It's going to fail in some important and potentially catastrophic way. I also don't design all the options too early in the process. I figure out the most important elements and directions and functionalities that I want in the system, and I shop those options around to people, and we figure out which ones are going to be most promising. Once we figure out the most promising ones, that's when we invest the detailed design time. But I don't want to overstate how much is left to be designed. Much of what you'll see on the website, if you follow Suzanne's good advice to go to Elections BC and see this information, most of the things that are reserved for later decision are under the purview of the Electoral Boundaries Commission. They're not under the purview of the legislature. There are very few decisions, there are no decisions that are left to be made for the urban part of the rural-urban system. That's all up to elections, to the Electoral Boundaries Commission through Elections BC. There's very little to be decided about the dual-member system. There's one small technical point, very minor, and the main decision to be made about the mixed-member system is whether we use open or closed lists. And actually, the NDP on their website is committed to open lists. The Green Party is committed to open lists. So unless the Liberals are committed to close lists and are not saying so, and intend to, take out some of the Greens and make sure they're not able to vote at the time, we're actually going to have open lists. So really, the key decisions are all made, the information is out there and available for us all to decide.
Great. The question of fact, you have your facts answered that regard? Thank you.
My question is directed to two people who are explaining proportional rep. And can you please explain to me the differences between the three alternatives? That's why I came tonight, to figure out which one and how they work. Thank you.
I'll try to do that. Tony might go a little bit more technical than, so dual member, the first one is dual member. They're all mixed systems, as I said. So dual member is combining two neighboring constituencies and electing two MLAs. And so the top vote getter, each party could put one or two names on the ballot. The top vote getter would win that riding. It would double the size of the ridings as they currently are. And then there would be a process to determine the next vote getters. Those who got the next most votes on the ballot would then become the second MLA in those ridings. And for those of you who are interested, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Tony, but dual member is the system that is most likely to elect independents as well, if that's something that is appealing to you. Mixed member is the most similar, I'd say, to what we have now, and it is the one in which the sort of closed list remains a concern. But with mixed member, about 60% of MLAs would be elected exactly as we do right now, and then the remaining 40% would be determined by the proportionality of the parties, and that would be done on a regional basis. So, and the Electoral Boundaries Commission, an independent body, would determine those regions and those ridings. And then rural-urban is the third one, and it combines two different types of proportional representation to maintain good representation in rural ridings. So in the rural parts of the province, it would be mixed members, so it would be individual MLA and then regional MLAs as well. And in more densely populated urban areas, it would be STD, as we were talking about earlier. So essentially quite large ridings, and you would have a list of candidates that you would rank in order.
And which do you recommend?
We're not taking, I have my personal preferences. As the proponent organization, we're not taking a position on any one of the systems. We think that because we know the outcomes, because we're guaranteed a local MLA, we're guaranteed to not have a massive expansion of our legislature, and we know that there's a 5% threshold in place, and all three guarantee proportional outcomes, we think any of those would be preferable to what we have now. And so if you're interested, you can certainly get more information on Elections BC. Our VotePRBC website has explanations that provide some options, like I said, around more independence for dual member, more voter choice for rural-urban, like certain things that might appeal to you as a voter that will help you make some decisions.
Suzanne, the question was an explanation of the difference between the three systems.
Yeah, so it is not possible to know how the proportional people will be chosen. So in dual member, you vote for a party. You'll vote for the two Liberal candidates, or the two NDP candidates, or the two Green candidates, or the two, yes, you do. In dual member, you do, definitely. You vote for the pair of candidates. The party that wins that vote in your riding, so if it's an NDP pair, that first person in the pair, number one, they're in, they're good. But the number two person, that's the seat that's in play to achieve proportionality around British Columbia. So if you have a few BC Conservatives, they have to fit in somewhere. If you've got a few, I don't know about communists. I like using the marijuana party as an example, because maybe they'll have 5% of the vote. You got to fit them in. So all of these people have to be somehow fit in to that second member in the dual member proportional. So it's really, you can't tell how it's going to work out. There's a very vague explanation on the Elections BC website, but what it really means is they have to figure that piece out later. That's in the dual member. So let me give you an example. The west side of Vancouver, there's two pretty big name politicians, David Eby and Andrew Wilkinson. And that riding, called Vancouver West, let's call it, you cannot vote, and a lot of people in that riding might choose to vote for both David Eby and Andrew Wilkinson. They might like that because they're both pretty strong politicians, but you can't, because you have to vote for the political party. So you can only vote for two Liberals, or you can only vote for two NDP. And whichever one of those two falls by the wayside, there's no guarantee that they'll get in any other way. So that's dual member. And remember, in dual member, you don't know how that second person is chosen. In mixed member, again, some of the people will be directly elected, but then there's all the proportional pieces that have to be filled in, all those conservatives and marijuana parties and others. The Green Party, I've got to put the Green Party people in, because the Green Party actually gets a fair number of votes, but they don't get many people elected. So they have to be plugged in somewhere as well. So those are the pieces that are not explained because they're inexplicable. And that's why I think it's a complete, I totally disagree with what Andrew said. I do not think voters should be asked to vote on something which is not fully laid out. And in the STB, they took the time, they took a lot of time, and they did it properly, and people knew and understood what they were voting for. We cannot understand what we're voting for on this one, because it's just not explained. And I think it's insulting to voters, and I think if they were serious about doing this properly, do it properly, spend another year, figure out the details, present it to people properly, and let people vote properly. I don't even go into the rural-urban one, because I actually think rural-urban is not even constitutional. I don't think you can have part of the province voting one way and another part of the province voting another. That remains to be seen, but there you are, there's one. I may be right, or I may be wrong about that, I don't know, but my own view is I just don't think it's constitutional, and I don't think it's right to have two different voting systems. You don't even know who's rural, and you don't even know who's urban. You don't even know, I mean, I guess we're going to fall into urban in this neighborhood, but you know, if you're in Kamloops, are you urban or are you rural? They don't know.
There's clear differences in perspective, and that's why they're on different teams. And that's what we're here to find out, which one is more understandable and acceptable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here you go.
First of all, thank you very much for all the people involved doing the debate and for organizing. I find this bit of like in the legislature. It's this way or that way, whatever. And I'm going to put in a plug for something in Coquitlam on this coming Tuesday at the Coquitlam Public Library. I've got Elections BC explaining it. It's nonpartisan, unbiased. I find this very biased and certainly partisan, which is unfortunate. What I'd like to do to challenge each of you is to do a 1-minute elevator speech, unbiased, on your opinion.
Unbiased.
Well, it's
Informative.
you said partisan. We're not partisan. The no to proportional representation is not partisan, but we definitely have a position. And our position is that we should be voting no. The system that we have right now, first past the post, very easy to understand. Simple system. We all understand it. Everybody in this room understands it. There's no things left to be decided later on. Simple. It's led to a stable democracy, one of the best places in the world, and it's a successful democracy. We should keep that system. And to trade it in for something that none of us can understand because it hasn't been explained, I think is a poor idea. I think if the government was really serious about this, do it properly, get an explanation out there, and let people make a proper decision. Because right now, you're voting on a pig in a poke, as they say. You're voting on something which is not normal.
Fear change.
I think we have a very good system right now. It's led to a very stable place.
That's your opinion.
Yes, it is, and
A lot of people here, obviously here for change. Why do you fear change?
I do not fear change. I love change, but I do not think we need to change our voting system in British Columbia, and I'm on the official no proponent side on that.
If we can, please, would you stop bilateral discussion?
The question was asked at the podium.
We have a good system now. Your MLA is accountable to you. You know how it works. We know how it works. It's led to a very good result. What proportional representation can lead to is a lot of instability, a lot of failure. Yeah. And the cooperation and so on that is aimed for simply doesn't work. It doesn't work in countries around the world right now. And you just look at the Swedish election right now for a very good example.
Excuse me, don't compare what happens in Ireland and Italy.
Okay,
Okay,
there's an
I'm gonna actually try to take your
opportunity for the other
challenge,
side.
because I think it is a good one. And it's hard, obviously, we're here because we have the positions that we have. But I don't think proportional representation is gonna mean we all get a unicorn in our backyard and that everything is sunny and rosy and happy. But I also don't think it's gonna mean the sky's gonna fall. I think that we do have a functioning democracy. I think there's a lot about British Columbia that we can all be proud of, but I think that there's a lot of people that are currently excluded from our political system, and that we have an opportunity right now to try something new. And there's safeguards built in, particularly because we're able to have a vote after 2 elections to see if it's working. And I think that there is enough things that are not going well in our society right now for enough people that we owe it to ourselves collectively to try something different, to try and improve. Just because things are okay, and for many people they're very good, but for many, many people they're not. And so we have an opportunity before us to try something different, and I really think that we should take that. It's about as unbiased as I can get on this issue.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you, Graham, and the organizers. I have 3 questions that I hope are quite clear, and it's about thresholds. Happened to serve with the United Nations, and I was exposed firsthand to human rights advocates. Were seen as human rights advocates in their community, but labeled as extremists. And I've seen suffering people labeled as extremists and terrorists, and I think it's a kind of a chicken and egg situation. Your voice is ignored, and you're trying to do things to get heard, maybe you become an extremist. So I heard that the threshold for a party to be represented would be 5%. I'd like to hear, is this the Goldilocks number? Is this a number that's too high? That's going to allow people that maybe some feel should not be there? Is it too low? Is it just right? The second threshold is, and I know the answer, but I'd like to ask the panelists, what was the result the last time we voted on this? Because we did in BC. And why was this dismissed or not followed, or were the rules very clear? And my third question about threshold is, what's the threshold this time around? Is it first past the post?
Tackle a couple of them. Okay, I wrote them down just so I made sure I remembered them. So your first question is there a threshold of 5%? And I would say, so yes, that's what the Attorney General has promised, as stated in the report. It's also roughly the natural threshold for British Columbia. So British Columbia can be roughly divided into 4 regions. There's Vancouver Island, which is about 14 seats, the interior and the north, which is about 24, and the remaining ones are in the Lower Mainland. And so roughly you could think of it as sort of Fraser Valley, Surrey, and sort of Metro Vancouver, and both are roughly 24, 25 seats. So if those are the regions, and there may be an argument that in the Lower Mainland we actually divided into 3 regions, and the Electoral Boundaries Commission will have something to say about that, that means that for any party or individual to get a seat under a proportional system in that area, they need to get 1/20 of the vote, which is roughly 5%. And so that corresponds to about 40 or 50,000 votes. So that's going to be a good challenge for. I don't know what Suzanne is smoking if she thinks that there will be that many people voting for the marijuana party in some of these areas, but I think there we go. So I think it's just a natural threshold and in BC, so I don't think there's much point in debating it. The only real debating point is whether it should be higher than that. Because one could artificially do that by having regions of 15 or 10 seats or something like that. The second question was, what were the last results? The first referendum was 58% in support, and the government, after the process started, actually passed legislation that said that they would not feel bound unless it got to 60%. That actually didn't mean that they weren't allowed to act on it. They could have, without feeling bound, they could have felt obligated, or some other word like compelled, which is the normal response when you win a majority, when the majority will is expressed. But that didn't happen. Same thing happened in Prince Edward Island recently in 2016 when they got 55% support in favor of mixed member proportional, and the government said, well, maybe not enough people showed up to vote, so we're not going to respect that. They, like in BC, they decided in Prince Edward Island to run another referendum on it and see what happens there. I think Suzanne is being too generous about her government's approach to that second referendum, describing all the steps they took. They actually failed to distribute the Citizens Assembly report the second time. First time around, they sent the Citizens Assembly report to every household in the province. This time around, the NDP government is asking Elections BC to send an informational brochure to every household in the province. So in fact, you'll get some information without having to rely on the relatively meager budgets that we're getting, which works out to about 10 cents per person around the province. So we're having a hard time communicating on that amount of money. In terms of the threshold for this, well, it's just what the standard is for referenda in Canada, which is 50%. Thanks.
It could be a very small number of people voting. I think another problem with this vote, so by the way, the second STV vote failed pretty dramatically, and Anthony might remember the numbers, but I think it was something like 60-40 vote. About 60% no and 40% yes. So that was a fairly strong vote against STV. And that was when people did have a lot of information, including maps. There are no maps on this one. You don't know what your riding will look like. If you're a mixed member, how big will the district be? If you're a dual member, what will the ridings look like? We don't have any of that information now. Not only that, we all know that there's a municipal election underway. And people, and certainly in many municipalities, are paying a lot of attention to the municipal election because they're pretty interesting. It's interesting in Vancouver this time, it's interesting in Surrey. There's a lot of mayors not running again, a lot of councillors not running again. There's going to be a pretty dramatic changeover in municipal government in a few weeks' time. And that is occupying a lot of the election kind of people's thinking at the moment, concentration. To have the municipal election on October 20th and then start sending these ballots out 2 days later, I just think it's very poor on the government to be doing it this way. I think if they were serious about doing it properly, as I say, give it another year, do it properly, but don't put it on top of a municipal election. Give people the right amount of information. There could be, to an answer to your threshold question, yes, it's 50%, but it could be 50% of a very tiny number. We don't know, but it's a mail-in ballot. How many people will actually take the trouble to mail it in? Hard to say, but that's what it will be, 50%. Now, the government is saying it's bound. Let me just add one more thing. They're going to have to there has to be legislative changes. There's all kinds of stuff that they have to use, and they will have to get those things through the legislature. They don't actually have a majority because they have to have the Greens agreeing with them. They may not. We don't know how all of those things will turn out.
Good evening. I think there are reasonable arguments on both sides of this issue, but I can tell you there's a couple of things that really bother me. The government is proposing 3 alternatives for us to vote on, and yet there are no maps, there are no riding boundaries, there are no number of MLAs per riding, there's no number of registered voters. We are actually voting on something we know absolutely nothing about. I don't think that is good democracy. Second, the other thing that really bothers me are these so-called pop-up lists. Now, whether they're open or closed, in my reading of it, someone can become elected without ever being nominated, without ever, if it's a party list, who has to say, in theory, that they have to run for office or be nominated? They're on the list. You're shaking your head, but I can tell you, if you read the reading paper list that I've read, I'm not an expert on it, but there'll be lists and people will come off those lists. I don't think that's the direction we want to go in our democracy. Having people elected who, you know, they go off to Hawaii and come back and be appointed to the legislature. And I don't think that's fair nor wise.
The question was, do you agree?
I agree completely. I think you're absolutely right on both of those points.
I agree with you on your second point, and as I said earlier, we think that every MLA in the legislature should be put there by the voters. And so when we talk about open list or closed list, that's what we're talking about, and we are looking for commitments from all three parties who will be the people, part of the committee making those decisions to commit to open lists. So essentially, with an open list, you would vote for your local MLA, and then you would have a list of regional MLAs that the voters would pick from, and whoever got the most votes would then be your regional MLAs. And who's on those lists? Well, parties, I mean, as Suzanne said earlier, parties pick their candidates in many ways, and there's often candidates who are appointed. We have closed lists right now, to be frank, that parties will appoint candidates, and they're just lists of one candidate that you get to, per party. To your previous point around the boundaries, the elector, I personally would find it problematic if this government decided that they were going to draw electoral boundaries. I think that belongs to the Electoral Boundary Commission, and they will be a process. And every time the Electoral Boundary Commission reviews the sizes of our ridings, there is a public process involved, and often there's adjustments made because people in a community that may be arbitrarily, on one side of the boundary, but there's a natural fit for them to belong to the other side, will go speak to the Electoral Boundaries Commission and make their case. What we do know, though, is again, we know that there are certain outcomes that are in the regulations, and that is primarily, I think, one of the most important ones, is that no region of the province is going to lose MLAs, and that we're also not going to increase the size of our legislature by more than 10%. So we're not going to have a dramatic increase in the number of MLAs. We don't know the exact regions, it's true, and we don't know the exact boundaries, but we know that we will have just as much representation, and we know that there will be a public process that we can have input in as citizens to what those boundaries look like.
Super, thank you. We have two more questions, and then I think we're running close to our tucking out hour. Are we ready?
Thank you very much. Probably too late for this, but Graham, I would have gladly volunteered to be timer for the evening. My name is Ben Craig, running for City Council in Whitlam here. My question surrounds costs. So under the current system, we have one MLA. Under a PR system, we'll have one MLA plus a number of regional MLAs, if I understand it. And that to me is roughly the same. Right. Well, to me that sounds like bigger government, and I'd like you to take a minute, if you could, to compare the costs under each of the systems. Thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be bigger government, and Maria says that the legislature won't increase by more than 10%, but there are people who crunch these numbers and think that that actually is not possible, because don't forget, you've got to achieve that proportionality. So if the Greens get 15% of the votes, you're going to have 15% of the people in the legislature will have to be Greens. And if there's some Conservatives out there, they have to be in the legislature. So you've got to fit all these people in. So I don't think that you can we don't know the formulas, to the point made earlier. We don't know what the formulas will be, but the legislation will definitely be bigger, and I think it could be quite a bit more than 10% bigger. So yes, it will be more expensive. And the stats, in terms of overall government, the stats are that a proportional representation governments do cost more. The cost of government is about 29% of GDP in proportional representation. And in first past the post, it's about 25%. I think I've got roughly those numbers right. So proportional representation governments cost more, they have more government spending than first past the post governments. So there's a cost answer for you.
Maria, okay. Short answer, and we have one more question.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm not sure who's crunching numbers, but the Attorney General's office has said, that Suzanne references, from the Attorney General's office and in the regulations that were released, and part of what Elections BC has been told is no increase of more than 10%. So that would bring our legislature from 87 up to 95. And so right now that is enshrined in the regulations.
Okay, thank you.
Last question. My name is Paul Benedict. One thing what I like about this is that we're talking, we're discussing, and so forth. And I think by voting yes, that this, oh, okay, I'm sorry. By voting yes, that we would have this in Parliament where these extreme parties, where the Liberal representative here mentions that they would get in there. Well, I ran as an extremist 3 times in the federal elections, and we don't get our democracy. We're excluded from the media, we're excluded from, the Chamber of Commerce would never invite us there. So if we want the voice of the people to speak, everybody should have a discussion, have a say, and so forth to do. If we continue the way we're doing right now, some extremist parties, marijuana party, well, it's legal now, it's getting legal, and they're getting represented. So if one party is extremist, I'm sorry, I got to mention that, but she mentioned it, the Liberal representative. If they get 10%, why should they have a voice in the Parliament, you know? You know, why should be left to the cartel party? You know, it should, everybody should give. So anyway, I'd like you to answer that.
Well, that is fundamentally what proportional representation is. It means that the political parties get their representatives. It doesn't mean that the citizens, that the communities, right now it is the community who chooses the person. But under proportional representation, part of your vote or all of your vote, depending on the system, goes to a political party. And those political parties get to have their representatives in the legislature through a distribution system that is not yet defined.
I just wanted to say a couple of words about that. So I did want to, this idea that the parties get your vote, it's really not true for any of the systems. The only thing that is true is that the proportionality, when you look at the party affiliations of the candidates that you're voting for, will balance out in the end. But when Suzanne says that it's inexplicable how some of these people get elected, it's not. It's the people who get elected are the candidates who ran, who got the most votes amongst the parties that deserve seats in the legislature. So you will look at those, you look at the lists. I mean, for the most part, the regional lists in the mixed member system are simply the lists of the people who are running in all the local ridings. So if we had, Burnaby, Coquitlam, Westminster, we've got 9 seats. That'll probably turn into about 6 ridings where one person gets elected there. And then all the 6 candidates from the various parties will be on the regional side of the list. And the ones that get elected in the end for the 3 pop-up seats are the strongest candidates, the ones who got the most votes running in their local ridings. And I did just want to say, I wanted to go back to the gentleman who asked us to try and give a neutral response. The major international political science organizations, the American Poli-Sci Organization, the International Poli-Sci Organization, and the British one, they did a survey a small number of years ago, and they asked all their members, not just all their members, but the ones who specifically study electoral systems, they said, what is your preferred system? So you might as well get some expert opinion, right? 1 in 8 said first past the post. Okay? 75% of them said proportional representation. Let's listen to the experts.
Thanks. Thank you for taking the time tonight to be here. I got involved in politics a number of years ago. I believe in democracy. I was excited by a candidate running in my riding. I've been involved in a number of political campaigns over the years, and I have a lot of respect for people who put themselves out there and run for office from any party. But I also have been quite disappointed in people that I supported who end up in government, who I know share my values, who I know are doing their best or are bringing our fight to government. I don't think our current system supports our politicians in being the best who they can be. I think the majority of people who run for public office do so because they have something they want to achieve. They have a policy outcome they want to see. They want to make people's lives better. And I think we have an opportunity right now to really examine how well we are served by our government. Think about who your MLA is. Think about the interactions you've had with our current government, with our previous government, with your civic government. And look at this, when we look around the state of the world, and democratic institutions are failing the majority of citizens. People are turning away from democracy, frankly, and we're lucky. We're not seeing that to this degree yet here in BC, but it's close. It's to the south of us, it's to the east of us, and the only way that we can combat the erosion of our democratic institutions is to strengthen our democracy. And we have a big opportunity this fall to vote for a system that will put people first, that will make our votes count, and that will ensure, that will force politicians to put people's interests before their own, before their parties. So I urge you to seek out the information you need to feel like you can make an informed vote, and to talk to your friends and neighbors, and to get people engaged. I do think that voter turnout is going to be a challenge. I think people are busy in their lives, and for all of the reasons that I've talked about, government is not serving people, and politicians are not serving people, and that is something that we should all be concerned about. And we have an opportunity to address that, so I hope you'll consider voting for proportional representation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I really do appreciate you being here tonight as well. It is on top of the municipal election, and as I mentioned earlier, and I know that there's a lot of interest in that election, so I'm glad you're here paying attention to this one, because this is a big, important decision for British Columbia. I thank Maria for saying that the people who run for office want to make people's lives better. That's absolutely true. It's true for you. It's true for everyone else running for, it's true for everyone else running for city council, for municipal government, for provincial government. It's a far more generous and accurate characterization than the one earlier, which said it's only elites who are there to represent their elite interests. That is absolutely not true. People are there for the right reason, no matter which party they run. I would strongly recommend you keep the current system, that we keep the current system. I would ask that you vote for the very first box on the ballot, the first past the post box, and then you don't have to touch anything else. We have a system right now which every one of you can explain, every one of you understands, every one of you knows how your representative is chosen, and they are your representative, and they will act in your best interest. When you go in to see them, they will help you, they will take your concerns back to Victoria, and they will look out for you, because they are accountable to you. Proportional representation, you get people there because they're on a political party's list. They are accountable to that political party, and that's not a good system. So we have to look, the only way, I was commenting earlier that why are we looking around the world? We have to look around the world because we have to see how it plays out. It hasn't played out in BC because we haven't had proportional representation. So you have to see how it plays out in other countries in the world, and it doesn't play out well. And Sweden, I use Sweden as an example because they just had an election. And because they don't have a government yet, we don't know how that will turn out. And because you get that rise of extremist parties, and Sweden has an extremist party now that has nearly 20% in their parliament. We don't want that in BC. People who represent extremist parties don't get elected in BC because no district of voters wants them. But that is the change that happens under proportional representation. You get a very difficult time forming government. The political parties get to choose a number of the representatives, not all, but some. The political parties get to choose who the government is. You lose your vote for your representative. You lose your vote for your government. Don't give up on our system right now. We have a very simple to understand system. It's created a successful and stable province and economy. We should keep it that way. Please vote vote for first past the post, keeping the system that we've got when you mark your ballot, when you get it in the mail at the other next month. Thank you very much.
Done. Thank you, Brian.